Recognizes Mr. Griffith for 5 minutes.
Let me follow up on that real quick, and correct me if I'm wrong, but an investigation means you're looking into something that might have wrongdoing, and an audit means you're checking into the money to see whether or not we need to put different parameters around it. Would that be a fair assessment or something along those lines?
Generally, yeah. Investigations tend to look at criminality. They can look at administrative violations. This is not either of those.
This is just an audit to see what we can do better.
Well, it's also going to look at whether there were violations of agency requirements.
Okay, all right. I appreciate that. Thank you. Let me get down to where I was going to go initially, and that would be that I am concerned about the workforce and the workload questions. EPA's Office of Inspector General, that would be y'all, reported EPA has not conducted workload analysis in over 20 years, making it difficult for EPA to implement corrective actions and allocate its budget effectively. And I guess what I'm looking at there is that, you know, we've heard talk today about a few months where certain positions aren't filled, but here we're looking at 20 years, both Republican and Democrat administrations, that have not, at the EPA, gone in and looked at their workload analysis. And then we see with Hurricane Harvey that we had 13 Superfund sites that were affected. Am I not correct that if we had performed a workload analysis over time, that I'm not saying all 13 of them would have been cleaned up, but that we might have more of these Superfunds being cleaned up? And I also referenced, because we're talking about Harvey so much now, but I remember testimony in a previous hearing in a different subcommittee where they were talking about a site in St. Louis that hadn't been acted on, or in the St. Louis vicinity that had not been acted on in decades as well, that was a Superfund site. So can you help me out? Are those things that would have helped both before a disaster and just in general if we had a workload analysis so we could say these are the worst ones? Let's put most of our people there, and I'm happy to take answers from either of you.
Sure. I'll give my short answer, then Mr. Gomez can respond. My short answer is it's difficult to draw a direct line between the lack of a workforce plan and a specific failure to be able to cover something. I think we can all say, if you knew more precisely where your requirements are and how many people and what kinds of people you need to address those, you would probably have a better result. But I can't draw a direct, one-to-one correlation.
Mr. Gomez.
And I'll just pivot from that last comment, and I think that our point on our work on workforce planning has been exactly that point, is to understand again where, from data, where your people are, what skill sets you need, the locations you need them in, so that you have a better sense of how to meet that mission. And that mission could be that you focus on cleaning up hazardous waste sites. So, but doing a workforce analysis, I think, would help you hopefully do that better.
Well, and a workforce analysis would help us as legislators as well, although this is not an appropriating committee. We hear all the time that folks need more money. Well, if I know that you need more money because you're going to help rural communities, and I appreciated you mentioning that rural communities with water and waste water, help those communities instead of just send edicts down from the Alabaster Towers in Washington. Here's what you got to do without helping those folks figure out how they're going to do it with the money that they have. That creates big problems. If you had a workload analysis, we might be able to figure out where we could appropriate the money more advantageously to prevent problems before they happen, whether it be after a hurricane or when you've got a serious problem like we had in Flint, Michigan, or issues in my very rural mountainous district where there's problems we don't know how to solve and we're afraid to ask for fear that instead of coming in to help us, they'll just come in and try to punish folks who are trying to do the best they can under limited circumstances in a rural area. So I do appreciate that as well. So thank you, and thank you for putting that in both your oral and your written testimony.
Sir, I have one more comment.
Yes, sir.
That's responsive to your question. That is, our OIG Office of Program Evaluations, similar to audits, has a current project underway looking at Superfund workforce planning. And we'll keep you and your staff informed on the progress of that effort.
I greatly appreciate that very much. You know, we're just beginning the Hurricane Harvey efforts, and that will continue for years, and the environmental impacts that are already occurring and yet to be seen. And we talked about the Superfund sites there. Is there anything that you see that is not being done by the EPA currently, and I know it's really early in the Hurricane Harvey area, that we ought to be concerned about?
Again, I'll give my answer. It's always a dilemma for us. You know, as Chairman Walden said, you don't want to wade into the middle of the cleanup effort. On the other hand, you don't want to wait so long that your efforts are valueless. So we're always trying to figure out when it is that we get into it. I guess what I fall back on is the national response framework that Mr. Gomez alluded to, and it does give certain responsibilities to the EPA. We cannot mandate that EPA take any specific steps. After the fact, I think we would evaluate whether they took the appropriate steps under the framework, but I don't see a role for the OIG jumping in right now in the middle of the cleanup effort.
Thank you, and unfortunately, my time is up, and I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Pallone,